Before you judge me, I hope you understand the context of this story. My name is Carmen Rodriguez, and I'm 58 years old. I've lived in Miami, Florida for the past 30 years, ever since I moved here from Colombia with my late husband, Miguel. We built a good life here, working hard to give our daughter Isabella every opportunity we never had. Isabella is now 32, married to a man named Robert Martinez, and they have 2 beautiful children, my grandchildren, Sofia, 8, and Mateo, 5. The day that shattered my world started like any other Saturday morning in October. The Miami heat was already building, even at 8 in the morning, and I was preparing breakfast in Isabella's kitchen. I had stayed overnight to help with the children while Isabella recovered from a minor surgery. Robert had been traveling for work all week, and I wanted to make sure my daughter had the support she needed. Isabella and Robert lived in a beautiful 2-story house in Coral Gables with marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, and what Robert liked to call smart home technology. Everything was connected to apps and cameras, the doorbell, the security system, even the thermostat. Robert worked in tech sales and made good money, something he never let anyone forget, especially when speaking to people he considered beneath his social status. I was making scrambled eggs and toast when Robert came down the stairs, his face dark with anger. He was still in his pajamas, his usually perfectly styled hair messy from sleep, but his expression was wide awake and furious. The tension in his body language immediately put me on edge. I had seen this kind of controlled rage before, and it never ended well. "Carmen, we need to talk," he said, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. The formal use of my first name instead of his usual casual hey told me something serious was wrong. "Good morning, Roberto," I replied in my accented English, trying to keep things pleasant while stirring the eggs. "Isabella is still sleeping. The children will be up soon if you want to help me with breakfast." "Don't good morning me," he snapped, walking over to stand directly in front of me. At 6 feet tall, he towered over my 5'2" frame, and his proximity felt intimidating and deliberate. "I know what you did." I turned off the stove and faced him, genuinely confused by his hostility. The Robert I knew could be condescending and arrogant, but I'd never seen him this angry, especially not directed at me. "What are you talking about? What did I do?" "My watch is missing, my Rolex. The one my father gave me before he died. It was on my nightstand when I left for Chicago on Monday, and now it's gone." His voice was getting progressively louder, and I glanced nervously toward the stairs, hoping he wouldn't wake Isabella or the children. My heart sank as I processed what he was saying. I knew how much that watch meant to Robert. He'd told the story many times about how his father had bought it to celebrate his first big promotion, and how he'd given it to Robert on his deathbed 3 years ago. It was one of the few times I'd ever seen Robert show genuine emotion about anything. "Roberto, I'm so sorry to hear it's missing. Have you looked everywhere? Sometimes things fall behind furniture or get knocked under the bed." "I've looked everywhere," he interrupted, his voice getting even louder. "The only person who's been in our bedroom besides Isabella and me is you, and Isabella has been bedridden since Tuesday because of her surgery." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I felt my legs go weak, and I had to grip the granite countertop to steady myself. In 30 years of living in this country, through all the struggles and challenges we'd faced as immigrants, no one had ever accused me of stealing. The word hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. "Roberto, are you suggesting that I took your watch?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you. You took it, and I want it back. Now." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing the weather rather than accusing his mother-in-law of theft. I felt my chest tighten with a mixture of hurt and indignation. "Roberto, I would never." "Save it," he said, holding up his hand dismissively. "I've been thinking about this all week while I was in Chicago. You're the only one who could have taken it. You've been here every day since Isabella's surgery. You know where everything is, and let's be honest, Carmen, you've never exactly been well off." His words were like daggers, each one carefully chosen to wound. It was true that I lived modestly on my widow's pension and the small income from my job cleaning office buildings 3 nights a week. Miguel's medical bills before he died had drained our savings, and I'd never fully recovered financially. But the idea that my economic situation would drive me to steal from my own family was devastating and deeply offensive. I have never stolen anything in my life, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. How can you even think such a thing about me? I've been nothing but supportive of your family. Because it's the only logical explanation, Robert replied with cold certainty. The watch was worth $15,000, Carmen. That's more money than you see in a year. I understand the temptation, but I can't just let this slide. Roberto, please listen to me. No, you listen to me, he said, stepping even closer, using his height advantage to intimidate me. I know exactly what happened here. You saw an opportunity to solve your financial problems, and you took it. It's understandable, but it's also theft, and I won't tolerate it in my house. Isabella appeared at the bottom of the stairs, moving slowly and holding her abdomen where she'd had the surgery. She was wearing a bathrobe and looked confused and concerned. What's all the shouting about? You woke me up, and I think you're going to wake the children too. Robert turned to his wife, his expression softening slightly but still maintaining that cold edge. I was just explaining to your mother that my father's watch is missing, and she's the only one who could have taken it. Isabella's face went pale, and she looked between Robert and me with growing alarm. Robert, what are you saying exactly? I'm saying your mother is a thief, and I want my watch back. The words came out flat and final, as if he was stating an indisputable fact rather than making a horrible accusation. Basta! I shouted, using Spanish in my anger and desperation. Enough! I will not stand here and be accused of something I didn't do, especially not by someone I've treated like my own son for all these years. Robert's expression hardened again at my outburst. Yeah, well, maybe I was wrong to trust you. Maybe Isabella was wrong too. Maybe we should have been more careful about who we let into our home and around our valuables. Isabella looked between us, clearly torn and still groggy from her pain medication. The doubt I saw creeping into her eyes hurt more than all of Robert's accusations combined. My own daughter was starting to question me, and I felt completely alone in that beautiful kitchen that suddenly felt like a courtroom. You know what? Robert continued, his voice getting more aggressive and confident. I think you should leave. Pack your things and go home. We can't have a thief around our children, and I won't feel comfortable with you in this house until my watch is returned. Roberto, please. Isabella started to protest, but her voice was weak and uncertain. No, Isabella. I'm serious about this. I don't want her in our house anymore. Not until she returns what she stole and apologizes for betraying our trust. He turned back to me with a look of complete disdain. And Carmen, if you don't return, my watch within 24 hours, I'm calling the police and filing a theft report. The kitchen fell silent except for the humming of the refrigerator and the distant sound of early morning traffic outside. I looked at my daughter, hoping she would defend me, but she just stood there looking confused and hurt, caught between her husband and her mother. Fine, I said, trying to maintain what little dignity I had left. I'll go. But you're wrong about me, Roberto. Someday you'll realize that, and I hope you'll remember this moment and how it felt to destroy someone's reputation based on nothing but suspicion. As I walked upstairs to gather my few belongings, I could hear them arguing in hushed voices in the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I folded my clothes and put them in my small overnight bag. How had my life come to this? How had the man I'd welcomed into our family, the man I'd cooked for and helped with his children, come to see me as a criminal? When I came back downstairs, Robert was nowhere to be seen, but Isabella was sitting at the kitchen table, crying softly. The sight of my daughter in pain, caught in the middle of this horrible situation, broke my heart all over again. Mommy, she said, using my childhood nickname. I don't know what to think. I don't want to believe you would take anything, but Robert is so certain. Think about who I am, I replied, kissing the top of her head despite everything that had happened. Think about the woman who raised you, who worked 2 jobs to put you through college, who has never asked you for anything. That's who I am, Isabella. That's who I've always been. As I called a taxi to take me back to my small apartment in Hialeah, I had no idea that the truth would soon be revealed in a way that would expose not just the real thief, but the kind of man my son-in-law really was. The security cameras that Robert was so proud of would soon become the instruments of justice, though not in the way anyone expected. The ride home was silent except for the sound of Miami traffic and my own quiet tears. I spent the entire journey replaying the morning's events, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. But what I didn't know was that Robert's confidence in his accusations would soon become his downfall, and that the technology he trusted so completely would ultimately reveal the truth about who the real culpable was. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I sat in my small apartment in Hialeah, barely eating, barely sleeping, just replaying the confrontation over and over in my mind. Every time my phone rang, I hoped it would be Isabella calling, to apologize, to tell me they'd found the watch and realized their mistake. But the calls never came, and the silence from my daughter was deafening. My apartment felt smaller than ever during those dark days. The faded photographs of Isabella's childhood, of Miguel and me on our wedding day, of happier family gatherings, all seemed to mock me now. I'd gone from being a beloved grandmother to a suspected thief in a matter of minutes, and the isolation was crushing. On Tuesday morning, exactly 4 days after the accusation, I was sitting at my small kitchen table drinking Cuban coffee and staring out at the busy street below when my phone finally rang. It was Isabella, but her voice sounded strained and tired, as if she hadn't been sleeping either. "Mommy, we need to talk. Can you come over?" Her tone was carefully neutral, giving me no indication of whether this was good news or bad news. "Has Roberto changed his mind about me?" I asked, hope creeping into my voice despite my efforts to stay guarded. "Just, can you come over? Please? Robert is at work, and the children are at school. I want to talk to you alone." An hour later, I was standing on the front porch of their house, feeling like a stranger rather than family. Isabella answered the door, and I could see she'd been crying. Her usually perfect makeup was smudged, her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she looked like she'd aged years in the past week. "Where's Roberto?" I asked, as she led me into the living room, the same room where I'd spent countless hours reading to Sofia and Mateo, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays. "He's at work. I told him I had a doctor's appointment, but I really wanted to talk to you without him here." Isabella's voice was shaky, and I could see the internal conflict written all over her face. We sat on the cream-colored sofa, and for a moment, neither of us knew how to begin. The elephant in the room, Robert's accusation and my supposed theft, hung between us like a toxic cloud. "Mommy, I've been going crazy all week," Isabella finally began. "I keep thinking about what Robert said, but it doesn't make sense. You've never taken anything from us, not even when we've offered to help you financially." "Because I have my pride." "Mija," I replied. "I may not have much, but I've always been honest. I've always worked for what I have. I know. That's why this is so hard. But Robert is so convinced, and he's been looking everywhere for that watch. He's even called his insurance company to report it stolen." The word "stolen" felt like a slap, making the accusation feel more real and more serious. "Isabella, I need you to believe me. I never touched that watch. I barely even went into your bedroom, except to use the bathroom when I was helping you recover. I want to believe you, but where could it be? Robert is so careful with his things, especially that watch. He never just misplaces important stuff. Like that." I studied my daughter's face, seeing the same conflict that was tearing me apart. She wanted to believe me, but her husband's certainty was wearing her down, creating doubt where there should have been trust. "What does Roberto want from me?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. "He wants you to confess and return the watch. He says if you do that voluntarily, he won't press charges." The phrase, "press charges," hit me like ice water. The idea that my own son-in-law would have me arrested was almost incomprehensible. He would really have his own children's grandmother arrested? Isabella looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "He's very angry, Mommy. That watch meant everything to him. It was the last gift his father gave him before he died." After Isabella drove me home that afternoon, I sat in my living room and tried to think logically about the situation. If I hadn't taken the watch and Isabella had been bedridden, then who could have taken it? Robert claimed he'd looked everywhere, but maybe he hadn't been thorough enough. Or maybe there was something he wasn't telling us. I decided to call my neighbor, Mrs. Fernandez, who had been a detective with the Miami-Dade Police Department before she retired. She was in her 70s now, but her mind was still sharp, and she'd always been kind to me during the difficult years after Miguel's death. "Carmen, this is a very serious accusation," she said when I explained the situation. "But if you're innocent, the truth will come out. These things always do, especially in cases involving family members. But what if it doesn't? What if they never find the watch? Robert will always think I'm a thief, and Isabella will always have doubts about her own mother." "Listen to me carefully," Mrs. Fernandez said firmly. "In all my years as a detective, I learned that people who make quick accusations usually have something to hide. This son-in-law of yours was very fast to blame you. Why didn't he consider other possibilities first?" "Like what possibilities?" "Like the fact that expensive watches are often targeted by criminals who know exactly what they're looking for. Has anyone else been in the house recently? Service workers, delivery people, repair technicians?" I thought carefully about Isabella's recent mentions of household activities. Actually, Isabella did mention that they'd had some work done in the house recently. Something about updating their security system. "Ah, there you go. When did this work happen?" "I think it was last month. Robert was excited about it because it was supposed to make their cameras and alarms more sophisticated." Mrs. Fernandez was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her detective instincts kicking in. "Carmen, I think you should ask Isabella about those workers. Get names, company information, anything you can. And most importantly, ask about the security footage. If they have all these cameras Robert is so proud of, surely they recorded whoever was in that bedroom." The next day, I called Isabella with Mrs. Fernandez's suggestions. "Mija, I've been thinking about the watch situation, and I have some questions that might help us figure out what really happened." "Mommy, please don't start playing detective. This is already complicated enough. Just listen to me for a minute. You mentioned that you had security work done recently. Who did it? When exactly did it happen?" Isabella sighed. "It was a company called TechSecure Miami. They came about 3 weeks ago to upgrade our camera system and add some new motion sensors throughout the house." "And these workers had access to your bedroom?" "Well, yes. They had to install a new camera in our hallway and update the one in our bedroom. They were here for most of the day." "Why are you asking about this?" "Isabella, did Robert check the security? Footage from the day his watch went missing? If you have cameras everywhere, surely they would show who took it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Actually, that's weird that you mention that. Robert said the cameras malfunctioned that day. Some kind of technical glitch that corrupted the footage. Something cold settled in my stomach. How convenient." "What do you mean by that?" "I mean it's very convenient that the cameras stopped working on the exact day the watch disappeared. Don't you think?" "Mommy, are you suggesting that Robert is lying about the camera malfunction?" "I'm suggesting that you ask him to show you the footage from that entire week. All of it. And I'm suggesting you call TechSecure Miami and ask them some questions about their workers and about any issues with camera malfunctions." That evening, Isabella called me back, and her voice was different. Confused, worried, and carrying an undertone I couldn't quite identify. "Mommy, I called the security company like you suggested. They said their workers are all background checked and bonded, and they've never had any theft complaints. But they also said something that doesn't make sense. What did they say? They said Robert called them 2 weeks ago, asking about how to disable the cameras temporarily without it showing up on the main system logs. They thought it was strange, but they explained the process because he said he wanted to understand how the system worked for security reasons. My heart started beating faster. Did you ask Robert about that call? I tried to, but he got really angry and defensive. He said I was being paranoid and that I was letting you manipulate me into doubting him. He said he was just curious about how the system worked because he'd paid so much money for it. Isabella, you need to demand to see that security footage, all of it. I can't do that without Robert knowing, and if I'm wrong about this, if there's some innocent explanation. Her voice trailed off, but I could hear the growing doubt. And if you're right? The next morning, I woke up to my phone ringing at 7 a.m. It was Isabella, and she was crying. Mommy, I found something. I need you to come over right away. Robert left early for a business trip to Jacksonville, and I need to show you what I discovered before he gets back. As I sat in the taxi heading to Coral Gables, my hands were shaking. Whatever Isabella had found was about to change everything, and I had a feeling that the truth was going to be more shocking than any of us had imagined. The security cameras that Robert was so proud of were about to reveal who the real culpable was, and it wasn't going to be the person anyone expected. When I arrived at Isabella's house, she was waiting for me at the front door, her face pale and her hands trembling. She looked like she hadn't slept all night, and there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before, a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief that told me whatever she had discovered was going to change our lives forever. Mommy, thank God you're here, she said, pulling me inside quickly and looking around as if she expected Robert to appear at any moment. I need to show you something, but we have to be fast. Robert went to Jacksonville for meetings, but he could come back early if his schedule changes. She led me to Robert's home office, a room I'd rarely entered during my visits. It was perfectly organized, with a large mahogany desk, multiple computer monitors, and walls lined with his tech awards and certifications. Everything about my room screamed success and control, which made what was about to happen even more shocking. Isabella, what did you find? I asked, noticing that she kept glancing nervously at the door, as if expecting Robert to walk in at any moment. Last night, after we talked, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what you said, about the security cameras and Robert's strange call to the company. So I waited until he was asleep, and I came down here to look at the security footage myself. She moved to Robert's computer and started typing. He taught me how to access the system last year when we were having problems with kids vandalizing cars in the neighborhood. I remember the password because it's the date his father gave him, that watch, the same watch he's accusing you of stealing. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very watch he'd accused me of stealing had provided the key to uncovering the truth about what really happened to it. Look at this, Isabella said, pointing to the screen which showed a grid of different camera angles from around the house. This is the footage from last Monday, the day Robert says the watch went missing. The screen displayed multiple views: the front door, the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway outside their bedroom. Everything looked normal, just a typical day in their household. Now watch this, Isabella said, fast-forwarding through the footage. Here's when Robert left for the airport at 6 a.m. to catch his flight to Chicago. I watched as Robert appeared on the hallway camera, carrying his suitcase and looking normal. Nothing seemed unusual about his departure. And here's when I went to bed, Isabella continued, showing footage of herself walking slowly to the bedroom around 10 p.m., clearly still recovering from her surgery and moving carefully. I don't understand what I'm supposed to see, I said, squinting at the screen. Keep watching. This is Tuesday morning, about 3 a.m. Isabella slowed down the footage, and suddenly I saw a figure moving through the hallway. At first, I thought, It might be Isabella getting up for medication or to check on the children, but then I realized the figure was too tall, moving too purposefully. "Who is that?" I asked, leaning closer to the screen. That's what I thought at first, too. But look more carefully. Isabella zoomed in on the figure, and my breath caught in my throat. Even in the dim hallway lighting, I could make out the distinctive features and build. It was Robert himself, moving through his own house in the middle of the night, 3 days after he claimed the watch had been stolen. But Isabella, he was supposed to be in Chicago, I said, confusion mixing with a growing sense of dread. That's what I thought too. But look at the timestamp. This is Tuesday, 3 a.m. His flight to Chicago wasn't until Wednesday morning. He lied about when he left. Isabella continued the footage, and we watched as Robert disappeared into the bedroom for about 10 minutes, then emerged carrying something small in his hand. The video quality wasn't clear enough to see exactly what it was, but the size and shape were consistent with a watch. "There's more," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look at this." She switched to footage from Wednesday morning, the day Robert actually left for Chicago. We could see him in the kitchen, making coffee and moving around normally. But then, around 5 a.m., he made a phone call. Isabella turned up the audio, and we could hear his side of the conversation. "Yeah, it's me. Is everything set up for today?" "Good. Remember, it has to look completely legitimate. The insurance documentation needs to be perfect. No, she'll never suspect anything. She trusts me completely." My blood ran cold as I listened to Robert's words. "Isabella, what is this about?" "I don't know yet, but it gets worse. Keep watching." The footage continued, and we saw Robert leave for the airport. But before he left, he did something that made my skin crawl. He went back to his office and spent about 20 minutes at his computer, typing frantically and occasionally making more phone calls. "I checked his browser history after I saw this," Isabella said. "He was researching pawn shops in Chicago, specifically ones that buy expensive watches without asking too many questions." The pieces were starting to come together in my mind, but I could hardly believe what I was thinking. "Isabella, are you saying that Robert stole his own watch?" "I think so, but I think it's much worse than that." Isabella pulled up another screen, showing what looked like financial documents. After I saw the footage, I started looking through his computer files. Robert always told me I shouldn't worry about our finances, that he had everything under control. But look at this. The documents painted a devastating picture. Credit card debts totaling over $85,000, a second mortgage on the house that Isabella knew nothing about, and missed payments on multiple accounts. There were also emails from Robert's company indicating that his sales performance had been declining for months and that his job was in jeopardy. "Mommy, we're broke. We've been broke for months and I had no idea. Robert has been hiding it all from me." "But your house, your lifestyle, the children's private school, all financed by debt that I didn't know existed. And look at this email." Isabella clicked on a message from an insurance company dated 2 weeks before the watch allegedly went missing. It was confirming that Robert had increased the coverage on his personal property, specifically listing the Rolex watch with a value of $15,000. "He planned this," I said, the full scope of Robert's deception becoming clear. "He planned to steal his own watch, claim it was stolen, collect the insurance money, and sell the watch in Chicago for cash. And he decided to blame you because he knew I would never suspect him if he had a convenient scapegoat," Isabella said. Tears streaming down her face, the betrayal was staggering. Not only had Robert accused me of theft, but he had deliberately tried to destroy my relationship with my daughter to cover up his own crimes. The man I had welcomed into our family, cooked for, helped with his children, had been willing to sacrifice me to save his own financial situation. "Isabella, there's something else," I said, remembering my conversation with Mrs. Fernandez. "When people make quick accusations, they usually have something to hide." Robert accused me immediately, without considering any other possibilities. He wanted to establish the narrative before anyone could look too closely at the evidence. "And?" He told me the cameras malfunctioned that day so I wouldn't think to check them, Isabella said. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Robert's betrayal settling over both of us like a heavy blanket. Then Isabella started crying. Not the soft tears of confusion I'd seen before, but deep, body-shaking sobs of anger and heartbreak. "How could he do this to us?" she said through her tears. "How could he do this to you? You've been nothing but kind to him, nothing but supportive of our family." "The question now," I said, putting my arm around my daughter, "is what are we going to do about it?" Isabella wiped her eyes and looked at me with a determination I hadn't seen since she was a child. "We're going to confront him with the evidence. We're going to make him confess, and then we're going to decide what happens next. Isabella, if we confront him, there's no going back. Your marriage, your family, the children. My marriage was built on lies, Mommy. And he was willing to destroy our family to save himself from his own poor financial decisions. I can't live with someone like that, and I can't let my children grow up thinking it's okay to treat people the way he treated you." As we prepared to download the security footage and gather the financial documents, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. I would be cleared of Robert's accusations, but my daughter's world was about to be shattered. The truth, as Mrs. Fernandez had promised, was coming out, but it was going to hurt everyone involved. What we didn't know was that Robert's deception went even deeper than we had discovered, and that confronting him would reveal the full extent of his betrayal in ways that would shock us both. The security cameras he was so proud of had indeed captured the real culpable, but the story was far from over. Robert returned from Jacksonville that Friday evening, walking into the house with his usual confident demeanor, carrying his briefcase and talking loudly on his phone about closing some big deal. He had no idea that his carefully constructed lies were about to come crashing down around him, or that the security system he trusted so completely had documented his own crimes. Isabella and I were waiting for him in the living room. I had insisted on being there when she confronted him, both to support my daughter and to hear his explanation for the hell he had put me through. Isabella had spent the day copying all the evidence to multiple flash drives and preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most difficult conversation of her marriage. "Hey, babe," Robert said, kissing Isabella on the cheek and nodding at me with obvious coolness. "Carmen, I'm surprised to see you here. I thought we agreed you wouldn't be coming around until this watch situation was resolved." "Sit down, Robert," Isabella said, her voice steady but cold. "We need to talk about the watch." Something in her tone must have alerted him because his confident expression faltered slightly. "What about it? Did you find it? Did Carmen finally decide to return it?" "Actually, yes, I found it," Isabella said simply. Robert's face went through a series of rapid changes: confusion, hope, relief, and then something that looked suspiciously like fear. "You found it? Where was it? I told you I looked everywhere." "I found it on the security footage," Isabella said, turning on their large television and connecting her laptop. "Would you like to see?" The color drained from Robert's face. "The security footage? I told you, the cameras malfunctioned that week. There shouldn't be any usable footage." "No, Robert, they didn't malfunction." Isabella pressed play, and within seconds, the security footage was playing on the big screen, showing Robert moving through the hallway at 3 a.m. on Tuesday morning, entering the bedroom and emerging with something in his hand. The silence in the room was deafening. Robert sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, watching himself commit the crime he had accused me of. When the footage ended, he looked between Isabella and me like a trapped animal. "I can explain," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, do," Isabella replied, her voice getting colder. "Explain to me why you stole your own watch. Explain why you accused my mother of theft. Explain why you've been lying to me for months about our finances." "You went through my computer," Robert said, "and it wasn't a question. Yes, I went through your computer, just like you went through my life and destroyed it with your lies. I had been sitting quietly, letting Isabella handle the confrontation, but I couldn't stay silent any longer. Roberto, how could you do this to me? I treated you like my own son. I helped you with your children, I cooked for your family, I welcomed you into our lives with open arms. And you were willing to have me arrested to cover up your theft? Robert turned to me, and for a moment I saw something that might have been shame in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by defensiveness and desperation. Carmen, I never meant for it to go this far. I just needed someone to blame until I could figure out how to fix everything. So you chose me because you thought I was an easy target. I said, a poor widow who couldn't defend herself against your accusations. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, Isabella interrupted. You chose my mother because you knew I would believe you over her. You manipulated our relationship to cover up your crimes. Robert stood up and started pacing, running, his hands through his hair. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. The company is laying people off, and my sales numbers have been terrible. I owe money to some people who aren't very patient about getting paid back. What people? Isabella asked, her voice sharp with alarm. I borrowed some money from some private lenders to cover the mortgage payments and credit card bills. They're not exactly legitimate financial institutions. The full scope of Robert's problems was becoming clear. He hadn't just stolen the watch for insurance money, he was apparently involved with loan sharks and was facing the possibility of violence if he couldn't pay them back. How much do you owe them? Isabella asked. $35,000, and they want it back by next week, with interest. Isabella stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where Sophia and Matteo often played. So your plan was to steal your own watch, blame my mother, collect the insurance money, and pay off some criminals with the proceeds. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. You could have told me the truth, Isabella said, turning back to face him. We could have figured something out together. Instead, you chose to destroy my relationship with my mother and traumatize our children by calling their grandmother a thief. I thought about Sophia and Matteo, and how they must have been confused by the sudden absence of their abuela from their lives. The collateral damage of Robert's lies extended far beyond just Isabella and me. Where's the watch now? Isabella asked. Robert looked uncomfortable. I sold it. Yesterday in Jacksonville, I got $12,000 for it. So you went ahead with the plan even after accusing my mother. You were going to let her live under the cloud of suspicion while you profited from your own theft. I was going to figure out a way to clear her name later, Robert said weakly. How? I demanded. How were you going to clear my name when you'd already filed an insurance claim saying I stole it? Robert had no answer for that, and I realized that he had never intended to clear my name. He had been perfectly willing to let me be branded a thief forever if it meant saving himself from his financial problems. Isabella walked over to the coffee table and picked up the flash drive containing all the evidence. Robert, I've copied all of this. The security footage, the financial documents, the insurance correspondence, everything. I'm giving you 2 choices. What choices? Choice 1. You confess everything to the police and the insurance company. You return the money you got from selling the watch, you tell everyone that my mother is innocent, and you figure out how to deal with your debt problems legally. And choice 2? Choice 2. I take this evidence to the police myself, I file for divorce, and you face the consequences of insurance fraud and filing a false police report on your own. Robert sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of his decisions crushing down on him. Finally, he looked up at both of us with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Carmen. I was scared and desperate, and I made terrible choices. You didn't deserve any of this. You've been nothing but good to our family. It was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him since this whole ordeal began, but it was too little, too late. The damage to our family relationships was already done. I'll confess, he said quietly. I'll tell the police and the insurance company everything. But Isabella, what about us? What about the kids? Isabella looked at her husband of 8 years, the father of her children, and I could see her heart breaking in real time. I don't know, Robert. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. You didn't just steal a watch. You stole my mother's dignity. You stole our children's sense of security. And you stole any faith I had in our marriage. Over the next few hours, we worked together to plan Robert's confession. He would call the police first thing Monday morning, then contact the insurance company to withdraw his claim. He would also have to somehow retrieve the watch from whoever had bought it in Jacksonville, which would likely cost him more than the $12,000 he had received. There's one more thing, Isabella said as we prepared the confession documents. I want you to call everyone who was at your dinner party last weekend, all the people you were trying to impress, and explain that the woman who helped prepare your house is actually my mother, who you falsely accused of theft. Isabella, that will ruin my reputation, my business relationships, my credibility. Your reputation should be ruined, she said firmly. You falsely accused an innocent woman of a serious crime. The least you can do is publicly clear her name. As I prepared to leave that evening, Robert stopped me at the door. Carmen, I know you'll probably never forgive me, but I need you to know that I realize what I've done. I've destroyed my family over money problems that I created through my own poor decisions. I looked at this man, who had been so confident and arrogant just days before, who was now facing the complete collapse of his carefully constructed image. Robert, forgiveness isn't something you can demand or expect. It's something that has to be earned over time through changed behavior and genuine remorse. What can I do to start earning it? Start by being honest. With the police, with the insurance company, with Isabella, and with yourself. Stop trying to manipulate situations to your advantage and start taking responsibility for the choices you've made. 3 months later, Robert had confessed to everything and was facing charges for insurance fraud and filing a false police report. The insurance company had declined to pay out on the fraudulent claim, and Robert was working with a lawyer to try to negotiate with his creditors and avoid criminal prosecution by the loan sharks he owed money to. Isabella filed for divorce and moved back in with me temporarily while she figured out her next steps. Sophia and Mateo were struggling with the changes, but they were resilient children, and having their abuela back in their lives was helping them adjust to their new reality. As for me, my name was completely cleared. The police formally acknowledged that I had been falsely accused, and Robert was required to send letters to everyone who had been told about the theft, explaining that I was innocent and that he was the actual perpetrator. But the real healing came in the strengthened relationship. With my daughter, the crisis had brought us closer together than we'd been in years, and Isabella had gained a new appreciation for the strength and integrity I'd tried to instill in her throughout her life. Mommy, she said to me one evening as we were making dinner together in my small kitchen, I'm sorry I ever doubted you, even for a second. You were in an impossible situation, I replied. Your husband was very convincing, and you wanted to believe the best of both of us. But I should have known better. I should have known that the woman who raised me, who sacrificed so much for my education and future, would never steal from her own family. The security cameras that Robert had been so proud of had ultimately been his downfall. The technology he'd trusted to protect his property had instead captured his own crimes and revealed the truth about who the real culpable was. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. In our case, it came from Robert's own arrogance and his belief that he was smarter than everyone around him. The cameras he'd installed to spy on the outside world had instead turned inward, documenting his betrayal and ensuring that the truth would eventually come to light. Today, Isabella is building a new life as a single mother, and Sophia and Mateo spend every weekend with me in my small apartment, filling it with laughter and love again. It's not the future any of us had planned, but it's built on honesty and truth, which is something the old life never had. Robert learned that when you falsely accuse an innocent person, you better make sure there's no evidence that can expose your lies. In the end, the cameras revealed exactly who the real culpable was, and it wasn't the grandmother he'd tried to frame. The technology he'd trusted became the instrument of justice, proving that sometimes the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully someone tries to bury it. And I learned that family bonds, when they're built on real love and respect, are stronger than any lie someone might tell to try to break them apart.